In 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And welcome everyone to this episode of the Real Leaders Podcast. Going live here. Welcome Crowdcast and LinkedIn to the Real Leaders Podcast. Today we're going to have on Henrik Henriksson, the CEO of Scania and co-author of Sustainability Leadership, a Swedish approach to transforming your company, your industry, and the world. Henrik, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you. Thank you, Kevin.
So, Henrik, before the show, we're having a little technical difficulties. So thank you for all the fans waiting here. We've got Elaine waiting in the background, and we're going to have her on in 30 minutes. A little audio issues coming in today. So, folks, if you're expecting Elaine Grunewald to be on this show, she will be on this show just 30 minutes later. At this point in time, we can only have a side-by-side approach. So sorry, Elaine, if you're listening. But, folks, nevertheless, we're going to be talking about a lot today about sustainability in this new book that's coming out. So before we begin, let's just make sure all the tech is working. Okay, yeah, there we go. There's a chat box in the right, folks. So for everyone listening to this, if you want to join the conversation and ask these two your questions after the show, you can chat in the box. Also, folks, this podcast will be recorded, edited, and uploaded to the Real Leaders Podcast channel. That's on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, anywhere you get your podcasts. This episode will be released this coming Wednesday. With that being said, let's get this show on the road here. Here we go. In 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And welcome everyone to this episode of the Real Leaders Podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Edwards. Joining us today is Henrik Henriksson, the co-author of Sustainability Leadership, a Swedish approach to transforming your company, your industry, and the world, and also the CEO of Scania. Henrik, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, Kevin.
So I was practicing my Swedish for you today, Henrik, and I say "Grattis till denna bok," which means what?
Congratulations! Fantastic book. Congratulations to a fantastic book.
Congratulations! I think. Yeah. We're trying. I also got ett glas rad van tak. Ett glas rad van tak.
Ett glas. Yeah, a glass of something. Yeah, I don't know what you want to drink, but a glass of something. Yeah.
So it looks like my Swedish language needs to improve a little bit, and so does my understanding of sustainability, Henrik. So, first question here today is: tell us about this book and what the Swedish approach means to you.
Yeah, so this book, Elaine and myself, we wrote based on that. We believe that there is something special in the way that Swedish companies are approaching the subject of sustainability. We believe that it's something goes back to our roots, something about the Swedishness or the Scandinavian touch, where we have a long-term view on society. We also have a mean of planning a lot because of, I think, our dark seasons that we have. So we need to sort of plan ahead, but also that maybe we have enjoyed a good life for many generations now, and we have the possibility to think sort of higher up on the Maslow's journey, and we can, for example, take a lot of the social security and society and peace and prosperousness for granted, and based on that, maybe we have given us the freedom to think a little bit longer also when it comes to sustainability. So a number of features that are coming through in the Swedishness that we think also comes through from the society into the corporate life. And those we have tried to describe in this book. So it's about how you build in sustainability sort of in the core of the company, not seeing it as a campaign, not seeing sustainability as a project, but seeing it actually as a way to create a much stronger and long-term resilient company. And it starts by actually you need to find a true purpose of a company and connect that purpose to a number of key stakeholders. And usually you talk about the customer, you talk about the investors, and you talk about your employees and the people in your company. But we believe that you need to add more stakeholders, like the planet, like the society. And we see that is what many Swedish companies have done when they have embraced the purpose that is not only about generating profit, but is also to give something back to society. And this might sound like social democracy like we have in Sweden, but it is that combined with capitalism, we will say, so that we believe that we're doing this because, of course, we want to make good for the planet, and we want to take our responsibility as a social citizen, as a company. But we also believe that sustainability and profitability goes hand in hand, and that's why this is a journey that is not about sort of nice to have to transform your company to be more sustainable. It is about actually building a more resilient company and staying relevant for the next generations of both customers, but also of leaders in the company to be successful. So yes, there is this secret Swedish sauce that I think Elaine will tell you more about when she comes on. But we have found that there is traits in the Swedish heritage that is transformed from the society into the companies, and that is used as an advantage, and that needs to be built into the core of the company. So it's very much also to work with the values that you have in your company and try to find something that resonates with the people in the company, because you need to get everyone on board. And to make it a little bit more tangible, if I take the example of Scania, then we are a company that's operating in 100 countries around the world, 50,000 employees. We've been around for many decades, 130 years old. But for us then, our purpose, we belong to an industry then producing trucks and buses. And transport represents 20% of the global CO2 emissions globally. So we, being part of the ecosystem of transport and logistics, we are part of the problem. We are creating the problem, but we want to be part of the solution. So our purpose is to drive the shift towards more sustainable transport systems and solutions. And that purpose, we have made sure that it fits to all the stakeholders that I was into before, the customers, the employees, the investors, but also the planet and society. But we also made sure that it builds on the values of our company. And we have core values that go back 30, 40 years, that is built very much on the lean principles. And there, I think we have found sort of the roots of building sustainability. We connect it to something that people recognize. And if you do that, suddenly you don't have to push 50,000 people ahead of you. You actually more or less have to sort of hold back all the energy that's coming through in the company when people start to embrace and understand how sustainability fits to the values of the company, but also how it fits to the strategy.
See, Henrik, that's why I thought you were such a unique guest to have on this show. Scania, I think you said in the book, 1.2 million vehicles in 20 countries. You contribute 1% of the global CO2 emissions. It's not a good feeling to have. When you're going through your values and trying to go through this blueprint that you have now created and are influencing throughout your value chain, where did that start? What questions did you ask yourselves and your sales team to come up with a strategy to incorporate a more sustainable future and drive that shift?
Yeah, no, but I think you're right. We found a lot of energy and drive by actually acknowledging that 1% of all the global CO2 comes from our vehicles. I mean, we better shape up, and I think that sense of urgency created a willingness to be creating a solution. And I think one of the first things we did was, of course, to try to clean up in front of our own staircase, so to make sure that we are doing things right, that our CO2 footprint in our factories and our supply chain, in all our sourcing, our transport, everything there needs to, of course, to be so that we can walk the talk in a way. Then we needed to look at our products and services and make sure that we turn those solutions into becoming more sustainable. So we started working with transforming all our vehicles to run on renewable biofuels. That is the quickest way: biodiesel, biogas, bioethanol that you can put into the rolling fleet of these 1.2 million vehicles. Immediate effect, but also start to develop then hybrid vehicles, electrical vehicles, fuel cell vehicles that is coming into the market now as we speak. So But then, of course, you're so right when it comes to the sales side. That what I experienced is that, I mean, you can have this fantastic plan and strategy about turning your company to be sustainable. If it's not coming through in sales, no one will take you seriously. No one in your own organization, the people that are building these vehicles, the people that are selling it, the people that are developing it, I mean, they need to see that it actually comes through in the income statement. Otherwise, it's just a marketing campaign, greenwash. And I think that's where we really try to sort of work with our customers to create a pull. And that was not that easy, because most of our customers are small mama papa business. They run transport companies. Maybe they have 1 truck, 5 trucks, 10 trucks in the world. And we realized that they do not sit on the key to actually transform the transport system to become more sustainable. Even if we offer these beautiful vehicles that can run on these renewable fuels or on a renewable electricity, they don't have any pull from their customers. So we needed to approach actually our customer's customer. And I have spent, in my role as the CEO, the last 5-6 years, more time with my customer's customer. They don't buy a single truck from us. They don't buy a bus from us, but they design the logistical system and get them to understand that if you change the way you demand transport to be done, even better that you put it on train. If the train is more sustainable, fine, we're happy with that. But you need to start thinking about how do you decarbonize your logistical system. And in most industries, paper and pulp, steel production, fast-moving consumer goods, roughly 30% of the CO2 emission for those companies comes from transport and logistics. So it's a big sort of piece that you can address. So that was actually how we created a pool, by going to our customer's customer. And they were then starting to demand this from our customers. And then we that
Folks, I don't know about you all. If you're watching this, let me know if Henrik is going in and out of the screen. Seems like we lost a little connection with him.
Can you hear me now? Can you see me now?
Audio's back. Henrik, you're back.
Yeah. Okay. So what I was saying, Kevin, is that we have a at Scania, we don't have a sustainability strategy. Instead, we have a sustainable strategy. We have one strategy for the whole company, where we have embedded sustainability in everything we do, in our sourcing, in our production, in our R&D development, in our sales activity, in our service activity. So across the whole company. And I think that is a success recommendation that I would do to any other CEO. Don't see this as something you put on top or besides the rest of your strategy. Build it in, integrate it into the core. Create it sort of like the foundation. That is the way that you start to transform your company.
And that point about going, solving solutions for the customer's customer, I thought that was really interesting. And in the book, you talked about we can't do these incremental steps. We have to take a big leap. Explain to our audience what you mean by that, by solving the problems of the customer of the future.
Yeah. No, but I think when it comes to the book, it's basically 3 parts of it. One is to get the basics right. I mean, to do all sort of make sure that you can walk the talk. You transform your operation to be sustainable, your products and services. You build it into the sales, you build it into the development, you put it into reporting. Second part you do is that you make sure that you get everyone on board to accelerate this journey, and then you build it into the core. And you're trying to not only change your own company, but also change your industry. The final leap comes when you as a leader also take a bigger responsibility, and you use your influencing platform as a leader, and you use your company as a platform to actually create change across different industry sectors. So in our case, that would be that I am working a lot with other companies from completely different sectors that have nothing to do with my industry. They're not my customers. They're not my suppliers. They're not part of my sort of vertical, so to say. But I rather work with companies that are cross-sector, from other industries, and that way I think you start to create a leap forward in moving away from this ambition of changing your company, which with all the respect is a magnificent task in itself. It takes many years to do it, but then move to try to change your industry. And if you want to change your industry, I believe at least the best is to work cross sector. So we are working with companies like Siemens, E.ON, H&M, Ericsson, companies that is sort of coming from different industry sectors. And there we're trying to find common sort of streams where we can do changes together. Often logistics is one of them, but it could also be connectivity around 5G. It could be around sort of responsible sourcing. And if you start working then in these different other industry sectors, you tend to learn more, and you create what we call in the book then unexpected alliances, where you have actually more power to create change than you have in your own industry vertical. I can just talk from my own industry. I mean, if I go to the Association of Heavy Commercial Vehicle Producers, I mean, come on, that's the group of the smallest common denominator. You get nothing done. You get nothing done because it's just, I mean, it's your competitor. But if you start working across your sector, then things start happening.
How are you all collaborating and communicating? Is it just setting up Zoom calls? Is it conferences? Is it just networking? How do you build bridges cross sector?
Yeah, I mean, in the past we have used, of course, physical meetings to get together, and I think it has to start on the CEO level to sort of get the right commitment and the buy-in and the right priority. But once you have done that first physical meeting, at least we have now during the last 9-10 months been forced to use them. Zoom or Teams or other types of tools to communicate. And I have to be honest, I think you lose a little bit of creativity. You lose a little bit of sort of that sense of feeling. And especially if you want to try to be innovative together, it's a little bit harder. And I think also, especially if you haven't met in person, it gets a little bit more difficult. We were lucky with a book that we had an opportunity to meet all people in person and interview them. And there is, of course, in the book, there is around 13 different companies that are interviewed and used as cases to create sort of good examples and good examples of both leadership and leaders doing it, but also companies who have sort of found that magical sort of formula or that magic sauce.
Henrik, you started the show off talking about this, stakeholder approach. We all know in 1970, Milton Friedman comes out with a social responsibility of businesses to maximize profits. An approach at the time with the knowledge he had. Now it's maybe being redefined. How can we optimize capitalism to also for social or environmental initiatives? Are business owners and CEOs that nowadays increasingly accepting this ultimatum of if we don't take into consideration our environment now, we may not be able to survive or have the businesses we want in the future due to patchworks like policies that would just crumble economics? What are you hearing from the business owners? What's the conversations been like?
No, but it's happening now. It's happening now, Kevin. I mean, it is. I mean, and I think that's why we wrote the book as well, because we felt that there were so many good examples in Scandinavia that we wanted to share from different industries and sort of and give a little bit of a handbook on how you can get started. But once we sort of reach out to other parts of the world, we see it now popping up everywhere, and there is a lot of initiatives. And I think it comes from a firm commitment to the Paris Agreement. And the role that corporates has to play in that. I learned recently that out of the 100 biggest entities in the world, which includes countries as well, 69 of them are companies. So I mean, we have a great responsibility as the corporate world to actually move this. And I think that has been realized because, I mean, leaders of companies are also people. They're also human, and they see what's happening to the planet and stand behind this commitment from Paris. But I think for two reasons. One, and that goes for myself. I think you want to sort of leave a better world behind you than you inherited from your parents. And I think you want to give something even better to our children than you got yourself. And secondly, the same goes for the company. I think, at least I feel, I want to leave something stronger to my next generation of leaders coming in to take over the steering and the helm of Scania. And I want to make sure that I can look my children, my two young daughters, in their eye and say that I did my best. When I'm sitting there 20 years from now, retired and tired, that I can look them in the eye and say, I tried, and I took my responsibility. So I think these two driving forces we see coming through in the interviews as well. People want to take responsibility, and we can step up the game, and it's happening now. It's happening.
It's definitely happening. We've had a lot of progress. There's more capital and philanthropic capital now than there ever has been, but yet the goals are like a moving goalpost. It keeps moving back and back and back. We need to take swift and immediate action now. How has COVID maybe accelerated this in terms of your collaboration and the urgency around change?
Good question, because I think you're right. I think it's created a sense of urgency that I think that we are pushing the planet. We are pushing the planet on many boundaries, and I think the climate, of course, is one. But there's so many planetary boundaries that are stretched now, and I think one of them is of course biodiversity, and you can see connection between the biodiversity that we have hampered and then sort of like these pandemics coming up, so I think this is a wake-up call for the world, and that we only have one planet, and we're all part of the same sort of world and the same ecosystem at the end. So I think that I see that it's accelerating the willingness from policymakers, politicians to step up the game and put money on the table, to take away hurdles that are sort of stopping development for more sustainable world, but also putting tougher demands on companies like us that shape up, get to grips, get started. And I also see that the movement among people, the general public, society is up to here. I mean, now it's time to do something. And I think that the corporates are responding. So yes, it's been an accelerator. COVID has been an accelerator in a good way. And I think when we restart the wheels now to spin in society or in the corporate world, we have to start it in a different way. We have to restart the world in a sustainable way. And I think there is alignment when it comes to that between policymakers, between corporate life, and between society. So it's a golden chance we have now. And let's take that chance. Let's take that chance.
So let's maybe help visualize for our audience what Scania is doing right now, taking this immediate action. What do you like about these biofuels, and how do you see the future of transportation changing?
Yeah. So, I mean, I get sick and tired of my colleagues and sort of industry experts talking about that sort of perfect technical solution that might come 5-10 years from now. I don't care. What can we do here and now today in 2020, the last days of the year? And then it is, yes, work with sustainably produced biofuels from residuals, from the forestry, from the farming, from the society, from our households, from sewage. Use that. We can run our vehicles on that. Just give us that energy. We can run it. That is something that we can work with here and now. Then electrification are coming in now in all countries around the world. The battery cost is coming down. It's starting to make sense for our customers to invest in that, but they need somewhere to charge. So we need to upgrade the basic grid to make sure that we have enough power for these big trucks and buses when they come in and into shore. So we need policymakers to take a couple of decisions to upgrade the grid, but that's easy done. And then let's see. I mean, I believe truly that electrification can work in most of the cases where we use vehicles. But then, parallel to that, we need to run our so-called combustion engines. But we don't need to put in fossil diesel or fossil fuel in it. Let's use that renewable fuels. And then maybe in the future, hydrogen may come in. There might be other industries that are willing to pay more than transport. Maybe the guys that are producing steel that I want to buy for my trucks that are CO2 free, or cement or concrete. So I think that now that is the journey the coming 5 years, I would say, and then as we go along, new technology will come. But please, let's focus on what works today. Let's not wait for that silver bullet, because it's never going to come. There's always going to be something new. And then of course there is other tools that we can work with to make transport more efficient, and of course the digitalization is an extremely powerful tool. The average truck in Europe, we know we have all our trucks that we have delivered since 2011. People might not believe this, but they are all connected. They're sending information every minute where they are, how much they're loaded, who's driving, what they're carrying. From those we can see that the average truck in Europe, for example, is loaded by 60%. And that's the world's most efficient transport system in the world, Europe, at the moment. 60%. If we can take that free space and use that so that every truck is loaded 100% every time, either by weight or volume, that's 40% waste. I mean, that's a dramatic improvement on CO2 emissions as well. So it's not only to work with a vehicle powertrain, but it's also work with digitalization. And that is possible now with this real-time data, with all the vehicles connected. We don't even need 5G. It's working today with 3G and so on. So those are the opportunities that we have. I think that way, and that's why we are committed as a company, we will reduce our CO2 emission with 50% every decade. We have signed up on so-called science-based targets, but we have also made a proper scientific study that is showing that we can decarbonize the global transport system by 2050, most probably already by 2040. Wow. So we believe there is a possibility, but it's also a possibility for us to do it in a profitable way for all stakeholders, the one that wants transport, the ones to provide it, and for us as a provider of equipment and technology as well.
So if the constraint you're running into for electricity would be, let's say, rebuilding the grid, right? Because any electricity I'm using in my house right now is probably powered by coal somewhere close by. So are you, by this stakeholder approach, and then when you run into that constraint, are you investing in collaborating and working with companies to build out that grid with politicians? Is that what you mean kind of by reaching out and following the constraint?
Correct. That's exactly. So let's unexpected alliances of work cross-sector. For example, one of them is correct, like into now, is electrification. How do we team up with the guys that are producing renewable sort of energy? Wind, solar, hydro. And how do we make sure that power comes into the grid and goes to our customers? If we use coal-powered electricity, we might as well continue with the fossil diesel. And the same goes if we, of course, use hydrogen that is produced by fossil fuel. So yes, we need to transform the production of electricity to be renewable, and I think it's happening all over the world. And we need to encourage that, and then we need to make sure that we have the grid that is strong enough so that when you want to plug in and charge that truck, you have enough juice, so to say, in the system. And if you don't have that, we need to come up with other ideas. I mean, what we do now, the first electrical trucks that we are currently rolling out to our customers, they are used in regional transport around cities and between cities, up to 250 kilometers on one charge. If they cannot have the grid where they have their depot, we provide them with a big container full of batteries, and then that stands and ticks during the day and charge slowly from the grid, and then when the truck comes home during the night, then poof, bang into the truck from this big container. So there are different solutions that you can do meanwhile, but while you're waiting. But we need a grid, and we need production of renewable electricity.
So if the message is today, start today. In chapter 7 here, you kind of roll out a couple different steps you can do by providing an initial sustainable offering, and then that kind of going to your sales team and then going out and selling it. What advice would you give to business owners listening to this that had that mindset of, I'll wait 5 to 10 years for some genius to come along and solve all my issues?
No, but it would be that, I mean, that you have to start this transformation now. And it doesn't have to be that you are sort of like a member of Greenpeace, or you sort of like hugging trees on your sort of weekends. I mean, it doesn't have to do, it's all about, if you want to build a successful business and you want to stay relevant, you need to start transforming your company to be truly sustainable, because otherwise you will soon come to a tipping point. It doesn't matter if you produce clothes or trucks or furniture or whatever it is. Sooner or later you come into a tipping point when if you have not transformed, no one will buy your products or services, no one will invest in you, and no one would like to work for you. So this is about survival. So I would start that journey today and start by building it into the core of your company. Find what is the sort of like what is it that holds the people together in your company? What is your purpose as a company? Make that strong and make that visible for everyone, and connect it to all these 5 stakeholders. Then you have a good start. And I think from that, then it's all about making sure that you get everyone on board. We did, for example, we to support 1 year ago, we conducted. Actually, I wanted from the beginning to conduct a strike with all our 52,000 employees globally. But then I was told that the CEO cannot order a strike. So we had to come up with another plan.
That's a first.
And that was actually, then we closed our global operation all around the world for at least a few hours everywhere to conduct a training why we need to transform our company to be sustainable. Even if we've been working on this now with our purpose for 4 years, that was a milestone. When we stopped, everyone sort of had to sit down and look at their own operation. How can we accelerate the transformation in my little group? And we trained all individual group, the smallest common denominator there, which forced us to actually pre-train then 2,500 teachers in our organization. And boy, did they become like some sustainability ambassadors or what? I mean, they are now a driving force. And then we managed to get the whole company with us. And that is also my second advice. Make sure that you get everyone on board, because this is a motivator, and it's a thing that can sort of gather the troops and really rally some fantastic energy. So that would be my second advice.
Henrik, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. I know Elaine's been waiting; she's been eager to get on the show. So let's bring this home really quick, Henrik. It starts at the top. That's what you've been saying throughout this entire 30 minutes here. Now, what is your definition of a real leader?
Yeah, for me, a real leader is someone who is a good listener. I usually say that someone who's got bigger ears than a mouth. So rather an elephant than a crocodile, if you know what I mean. So sort of that takes on and have the ability to listen to all stakeholders that I was into before. Of course, the customer, but also the customer's customer that we were into before. Think of yourself belonging to something bigger than just an industry vertical and like an ecosystem that like we were talking about. I think that is also a good leader who is taking on these 360-degree goggles and can see the world around them, and not just that small sort of silo that they belong to. So a listening leader, I think, and someone who is empowering people. I think that is a strength in any organization. Let people feel ownership for their sort of operation and their business or whatever it is. So ownership, this 360 degrees, delegate responsibility, and be a good listener.
Amazing. Henrik, it's been a pleasure speaking with you today, my friend. Very inspired by you, and I just hope others can get the same message today, and hopefully we can create some radical change in this world. So Henrik, appreciate your time coming on the Real Leaders podcast. For Henrik Henriksson, I'm Kevin Edwards, asking you to go out there, be a good listener, and always, folks, keep it real. Thanks, Henrik.
Thanks, Kevin.
All right, folks. Well, we got double the trouble here today. We're going to have a 2 podcasts in 1. You're getting it all, folks. That's right. Just going to give Henrik a round of applause here real quick. If you have any questions for him, make sure you have him in the chat box. We'll try to bring him here in the show coming up if he's able to come on. Right now, I'm going to invite on Elaine on the show, see if she's hanging around, and we can. It looks like she's accepted and connected right there. And then Henrik will close you out of here. Thanks again for your time. We'll make sure we send you the podcast, as this podcast will be available tomorrow on Apple Podcasts for the Real Leaders Podcast. Make sure to go on, leave a review, and subscribe to the channel. Henrik, thank you.
Thank you.
The world. And right on time, we've got Elaine
Grunewald. Hi, Kevin.
Elaine, you've been through the ringer today. A lot of technical issues. Thanks for joining us.
Can't stand it.
And aren't you an AI person? Aren't you supposed to be the one that's supposed to solve all my problems so this doesn't happen again?
Something like that, but I'm the world's worst IT manager. I admit it myself.
You know what they say, AI, not AV. It's much easier for AI versus audio and video. Well, Elaine, thanks for coming on the show and waiting. And I think it's really cool for our audience to get the show back to back. So now the audience gets the behind the scenes take. I'm just going to do a little countdown for the podcast. I'll introduce you. Then we'll go right into the podcast. How about that?
Sounds good.
All right, here we go. In 3, 2, 1. Welcome, everyone, to this episode of the Realers Podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Edwards. Joining us today is Elaine Grunewald, co-author of Sustainability Leadership, a Swedish approach to transforming your company, your industry, and the world. Elaine, thanks for being with us today.
Great to be here, finally.
So folks just listening to this, we just had Henrik on the show, and we talked a lot about purpose-driven leadership, how that can manifest throughout your value chain. We ended with customers, though. Kind of what are some things you and your customers can do? What's your relationship with Scania, and how are you working with their customers to build a more sustainable world?
So Henrik and I met during my time when I was at Ericsson, which is telecom, something totally different than trucks. So, and we write in the book, it's kind of a joke we have. We write in the book about, and Henrik talked about it a few minutes ago, about unconventional partnerships. And we together writing this book, people ask us all the time, how did you two get together? Elaine, I've been working more with the tech sector for the last 20 years, and Henrik coming from the transportation and trucking side of it. So, but we, just had some mutual contacts and started talking about this topic and about the lack of action and trying to create more of a sense of urgency within companies. And that was kind of that was our common thread. Like, we both knew that the private sector, Henrik said a few minutes ago about, the 100 largest entities in the world, 2/3 of them are companies. So we want to see, and I've had the privilege of working with some of the most amazing leaders who are galvanized on this topic. We want to see more people like that. So we thought, well, in the book, we talk a lot about the importance of leadership and using, encouraging leaders to use their own personal influencing platforms. And so we decided to use ours in the book. So that's a little bit the backstory on how we came together.
What was the process like in terms of writing this book? Having a podcast with 2 people on is hard enough. You wrote a book.
I think when it came to like the content and the vision, we were 100% aligned. But then when it came to, we present a model in the book, a model that we think any leader anywhere could use in starting or continuing or strengthening their own sustainability journey. So when it came to that, we really had to buckle down on and to get that right. And I think we succeeded, but we were talking the other day about, now we're coming into the holiday season. I remember last Christmas, we were writing every day, all day, trying to work during times that didn't interfere with like the normal work day. And we were in it was after New Year's. It was kind of the middle of January, but things hadn't kicked in yet. And we were like ripping up chapters and throwing them out. So we had a great copywriter and support that helped us pull it all together, Amy. But yeah, it's hard to take ideas, some of which are your own, some of which are someone else's, and then try to get a common red thread. But I think we figured out how to do that.
So, Elaine, you met and researched with a lot of CEOs who are impact leaders, sustainability officers. Maybe walk us through your discoveries through writing this book and how you think the Swedish approach can manifest in today's day and age.
Well, I would say the biggest discovery for me in the book was how much I learned. Sometimes you think you know something, or you could be a subject matter expert on a topic, and then you start talking. I mean, we had such a range of sectors that we interviewed, and that was deliberate. We interviewed startups. You know, Stockholm has a great, very vibrant startup scene. We wanted to capture the startup voice, the scale-up voice, all the way to the large industrialists. I mean, there's a lot of Swedish companies that are very old, 100+ years. So we wanted to capture that whole realm, and also have different sectors. So we interviewed Christian, the CEO of EQT, working with, you know, private equity and venture, and using sustainable development goals as a lens for their impact. We interviewed Jonas Samuelsson, the CEO of Electrolux, and how they've been successful with their green product range, delivering higher margins and returns than their like conventional products. We talked to Eva Karlsson, the CEO of Houdini. So most people think like that sustainable fashion is all about Patagonia. Well, those are the people that haven't met Houdini yet. And that's a Swedish brand that has fully integrated the planetary boundaries, which were a science-based approach. Johan Rockström wrote the foreword for our book. He was very involved in creating what's known as the planetary boundaries, and Eva made that her business plan, basically. And yeah, and I mean, I could go on, the list goes on, but so just talking to these people and these leaders about their business, and thinking, when we started the whole project with the book, we originally were going to have like a really global approach, and find leaders in China and India and all over the world. But, you know, that became so big that I don't know if we ever would have finished the book. So we said, let's keep to Sweden, because Sweden's what we know. It's where we have our network, professional network, and where we think Sweden is really, what we say in the book, punching above its weight when it comes to sustainability. And that turned out to be very lucky, because, you know, shortly thereafter, COVID became a reality and nobody could travel anyway. So we scoped it around Sweden and tried to capture like the essence of what Sweden is doing when it comes to sustainability in the private sector.
It seems like all these Swedish leaders have that purpose-driven, mentality in common. Like with Eva, with Houdini, when I was watching the interview with her, it was like, wow, this is very similar to what Patagonia was saying with biomimicry, and making sure that, when they ran into a constraint, like the cotton suppliers that were putting dyes into the waste streams that were, very detrimental to the ecosystems in those areas, they had to innovate around that constraint. And it seems like all of these business leaders in Sweden have been able to make that their business model. So could you explain to our audience, what that means and how you can actually make more money maybe in the long term, and that it's not necessarily a trade-off when you're investing more into your stakeholders?
I think the really interesting thing in Sweden for me, I'm from the US originally. A lot of people think I'm Swedish sometimes, but with my name, and Henrik obviously being Swedish. And then, so we always had this dilemma between us about Swedes are very humble. They're not bragging. They're like really not the big proponents out there, but you could see on every ranking in the world, basically, whether that's diversity, whether it's environmental leadership, like whatever indicator you pick. I mean, Sweden is ranking high up there. The Nordics are ranking high up there, and Sweden is ranking very high up there by all counts. But I think, there's a couple of things here that make Sweden unique when it comes to sustainability. One is a very clear commitment to long-term thinking, and inclusive growth. So a lot of Swedish society, the educational system is free, healthcare is free. You have less radical disparity in wealth distribution. You have a very high appreciation to nature with so much water and forests and everything. So I think, and what always struck me is that whether you're government, academia, in a company, sustainability is always high on the agenda. It's always prioritized. It's not the same debate as in other parts of the world where it's like, is it sustainability or not? Or is it growth or sustainability? It's kind of not in conflict in that way.
Right.
It can be both.
And that's what Henrik was saying, is that we don't have a sustainability plan. It's just we are sustainable in every facet that we do. Now, do you think that because of COVID, like here in San Diego, California, like not everyone, but a lot of people are moving out of the city. I took up surfing. Most of the people that are going into the outdoors now are doing that because they can't go and have the social life inside the city. In your book, in your argument, one of the first couple of pages, you claim, a high population density in these dense cities are a contributor to, environmental climate change. How do you think people will change in terms of their careers and where they live, and how that will impact and maybe even accelerate this purpose-driven business movement?
Well, there's so many things to say there. I would say first, like what COVID did is only enhance the fact that we have a planetary emergency. You could look at climate change, you can look at deforestation, you can look at biodiversity loss, and now you can look at human health caused through, a global pandemic. So I think that the reality of the challenges we're facing are even more in your face, you could say, because of COVID. And I think that I was just reading yesterday, I think, about, asset managers and the financial sector now, $7 trillion in assets are now committing to look at climate risks. And, so we're in the middle of a really interesting sea of change when it comes to, I think, corporate behavior and sustainability and commitments. And I think it's becoming much more real now, probably because we're faced with such a great threat. And one thing we talk a lot about in the book is, you can't solve, so these problems are existential, they're exponential, and you can't solve an exponential problem with an incremental solution. So it's great that companies are, starting to set sustainability targets and measure things and do all that. But that's not really enough. That's kind of the starting point. Just because you produce a sustainability report, it's not a get out of jail free card. You should do that anyway. So that for me is like getting the basics in place. And this is going back to the 3-phase model that I can explain if you would like. But
yes,
so that's like, yeah. So getting that reporting in place, you're expected to do that today. That's not a leadership move. I mean, a leadership move is finding the exponential solutions. That's the leap in the book. So the book, we have these 3 phases of what we call our sustainability leadership model. The first phase is the foundation. It's getting the basics in place. It's understanding, what rules are you going to follow, what policies, what codes of ethics, Henrik touched on it at the end, what is your purpose? Are you purpose driven? What's the culture in your company? So this is all like phase 1, getting these things in place. And why I say this, because everyone wants to go to phase 3, but you can't do phase 3 unless you've done 1 and 2. So I'm going sequentially here, but phase 2 is about the core business. And Henrik talked about that too, about, getting the sales working. He taught me one thing, or one line that I always remember, which is, if you're not selling, if your sustainable solution isn't selling, it's not real.
Right.
It's marketing,
Right.
So phase 2 is about the core business, like getting sustainability criteria integrated into your portfolio and taking that throughout your value chain all the way to the sales side of things. So that's the first 2 phases. Phase 3 is the leap. And this is really where I think individual leadership comes in, because if leadership starts at the top. You can also build bottom up, nothing wrong with that, because there's a lot of people in companies that want to make a change. But if you can't get, the leadership question right, it will also never happen. So a lot about, what we write about is both, as a leader, the responsibility to act, but also the opportunity, and in using the power of your leadership platform to get the change going. We also talk about other, things in the leap or the third phase, how like digitalization can be an accelerator. And that goes back to the question you asked about the way people work during COVID. I think that if COVID had happened, even 5 years ago, we'd all be in a very different place, because the virtual meetings and everything that we can do today, wouldn't have been possible probably in the same way even just a few years ago. So, I'll pause there.
Well, when you talk about lenses, like a planetary lens, maybe could you unpack that a little bit more for our audience? Because I think it's a really important point. For instance, when I hear impact investors or just investors in general talk about ESG, they say that's, and people have their own thoughts about ESG, but they say that's a risk lens for them. It means it's good management or good leadership in the company. What do you mean specifically by putting on goggles and having a planetary or societal lens?
So this goes back to the concept of society as a stakeholder, which is, I would say, very rooted again in like Swedish values and culture and way of thinking. But in our book, what we mean is that, and you talked about the 1970 Friedman quote, the purpose of the company is to make money and all that. But so you could look at things like the Business Roundtable, right? So they came out with their statement that says, it's not just the shareholder, there's other stakeholders. Okay, that's good, but that didn't really do it for me, because what we're talking about in the book, it's not just that you acknowledge that other stakeholder groups exist. What we're talking about in the book is you acknowledge and you understand what your impact is on them. It's not about what perception they have of you, of your brand. That's not the point of society as a stakeholder. The point is, do you understand what impact you're having on people and on the planet? And that's where these ideas of the lenses come in. And I would say, like, the Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, these are like a perfect framework for any company to try to understand where they have an impact, right? You have the world's greatest sustainable development challenges, all researched, all mapped out for you, and you just have to figure out what impact is your business causing in relation to them. So that's a great framework. But yeah, so we talk about how to have a societal lens and how to have the planetary lens. But the key to it, Kevin, is not just that you say, okay, there's others than the shareholders. We have customers, we have employees. That's not the point. The point is the impact. What's the impact of what you're doing on other groups? Absolutely.
And I think it's very inspiring to hear that businesses are taking this into account. Taking it into account, what does that mean? Okay, well, what about profitability? Let's talk about our lefts and our rights, our debits and our credits. We have a whole system to measure and be accountable for what we're purchasing or what we're liable for. Now, for impact, what are you seeing in terms of how robust this measurement system is? Are we going to have a clear-cut measurement system, such as your P&L or an accounting sheet? Like, what are you seeing that's out there right now, and maybe what are you hopeful for?
Well, I'll start by saying I'm super hopeful because there's so much out there. I mean, if you look, you made the comment about ESG. I remember, during my time in Ericsson and meeting so many socially responsible investors or ESG investors for years and years. It was always just about risk. Are there corruption risks? Are there human rights risks? Are there supply chain risks? It was risk, 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 risk. And there wasn't a lot of opportunity for a company to make the case like, yeah, well, we're handling those risks, but look at the sustainability opportunities. Look at how, what we could save by being more energy efficient on telecom networks, for example. So So I think what's happening now, and that was always my approach as a chief sustainability officer, it was always to balance the risk with the opportunity and find the metrics to do that. And I think a lot of companies have struggled to really find what are the most material indicators to track. It's very hard to, a concept like science-based targets, which I am highly supportive of, in the climate change discussion. It's not that easy to explain to a CEO or an executive team what's a science-based target and why the hell should we be reporting on that, So I think there's a lot of progress in the actual indicators that are being developed. I think there's a lot of progress because ESG is no longer just risk. The risk is still there, and it is still about how well your company is governed and do you do the right things, not just say the right things. But there's also a lot of more opportunity-focused discussion taking place, and a lot of investment now shifting into sustainable technologies. I mean, look at every fund, everything out there today. Everything is focusing on sustainability, and I think that's really, really exciting.
So AI sustainability, what is AI's role in this transformation and development?
Yeah, so I spent, many, many years in Ericsson working on a platform called Technology for Good. And that was basically about showing what the benefits that connectivity could bring, broadband in particular, whether, and take the SDGs again, like how connectivity can be a powerful and enabler and a driver of all the sustainable development goals. And then a couple of years ago, when I left Ericsson, I started, digging deeper into the questions around AI is great, and not just when we were talking about broadband back in the day as an accelerator of the SDGs. I mean, AI is like a turbocharger. I mean, you get exponential opportunities. From a company point of view, you look at new revenue streams, new relationships with your clients that you can get through data. And also, you can save dramatic cost savings to things like automation. But I wanted to understand what's the other side of the coin, because there was, after Cambridge Analytica and a number of events, like that happened over the last years. What does AI mean when it comes to personal integrity, like things like privacy intrusion or amplification of discrimination and biases? I mean, every headline you read today, you can see more and more of these types of discrimination. All the different hiring systems, for example, that learn on the data, and then the data is a lot of male-based, and women are dropped out of the equation through different, AI algorithms or whatever. So sustainable AI, it wasn't ever meant to be a term. You can say responsible AI, you can say ethical AI. It wasn't really meant to be like environmental sustainability in that sense, but it's more the ethics and the responsibility of it, because our lives are so controlled by data today that if we don't really start, and I mean, we collectively as consumers start to understand how our data is being used. I saw yesterday, Apple now is introducing this privacy scorecard, or like a nutrition label, but for privacy. That is one of the most exciting things I've seen in a while. I haven't dug into it yet, but it's pretty cool.
That's great.
So you know how your data is tracked and how it's used. That's the type of innovation we need to see now from companies in the responsible AI space.
I hadn't heard that, but that is essentially what certified B corporations have done for the larger whole. They do the assessments and they provide a nutrition label for any consumer or stakeholders see how ethically, sourced your products are, or your governance or anything like that. Are you mission locked? Things like that. Mm-hmm. In the book, Elaine, I think you drew a nice comparison between, the exponentiality of technology and impact itself. and climate change itself. You say the carbon law versus Moore's law. Moore's law, transistors and computers, just for people listening out there, are supposed to like increase in speed by, or like double in speed or halve it in costs, right? Like every 18 to 24 months, or like that type of period on a graph. How do you see like impact and sustainability being exponential to go along with this Moore's law? And also, what do you mean by the carbon law as well?
Yeah, so we made a really fun equation in the book. We wrote our own formula for exponential impact. So, and it's like it's like when you're counting CO2 emissions, you can't really combine that with human rights impacts. Like everybody wants one golden number, right? Like everyone wants to say, am I sustainable or am I not? What's my one golden number? But you can't combine apples and oranges in that way. And so what we did is we said, well, what would you need to know to determine what, what's your exponential impact? And we called our formula exponentiality, with the O with the two dots. It's a play on the Swedish thing, exponentiality. So we said, first you need to know your footprint and your own value proposition, getting back to the client and the customer part of it. So you know that. So this is like footprint plus value proposition. I've never done this without showing it, so I'm gonna like see if I can do this in words. So footprint plus value proposition times your own ambition as a leader to the X factor. So ambition squared, cubed, you decide, ambition to the X. And the X is the X factor. And that's up to you, and that's up to every leader to decide what is their X factor going to be. And so this equation equals your exponentiality impact. So it was a fun way. I mean, we did talk to a few mathematical experts, and it's not it was never meant to be a mathematical formula. It's meant to be, but it's a serious, we did it as a serious formula. So it's like, what are the pieces, if you want to have, whether it's carbon or whatever, you might be, in aquaculture raising salmon, it could be about water, it could be about, emissions to air, or it could be about carbon. So, but it's when you know those different parts of the formula, then you can start to talk about having an exponential impact. And I think the most important part of that formula for us was the ambition to the X factor, because most people think that, or they're not encouraged, or they think, yeah, okay, this is good enough, we have a sustainability plan, but they don't realize that if they really just turbocharge their own ambition, they can do so much more by using the power of their own platform. And that comes down, that is a question of leadership. It comes down to both responsibility, but also, can you build a coalition of the willing that will follow you on the sustainability journey? So with the book, we just tried to we create this model, we have this formula, and the whole idea of the book is like, what do we wish as leaders that someone gave us 15 years ago? So we're taking the book saying, here, you use one chapter, use all of it, use, pick and choose and find out if something works for you. And then we tell that story, through the companies that we interviewed.
It makes a lot of sense, right? Like the more impact products, let's say, you sell, the more money you receive, the more it goes back into those communities, the more it goes back into research and development. It's just this continuous exponential cycle of impact. And what you're saying is the ambition from the leadership in the organizations, the people within the company, the employees, they really have to rev those engines up on the ambition side to make it happen. to make a
It's so
difference.
much more important than people give it credit for. You know, a
Yeah.
lot of companies just think like, if we have our sustainability goals, that's enough. It will happen on its own. No, I mean, we say leaders should be evangelizing this every day, everywhere, every chance they get. So I remember working for many years with Hans Vestberg when he was CEO of Ericsson. Now he's Verizon, but every meeting he had, whether that was an investor meeting, a customer meeting, you know, a road show, whatever, an all staff meeting, he would always put sustainability on the agenda. And you know, so it's really about having that message there, and then making sure that you're backing your messages with specific actions, because if you don't, then of course that's when it falls apart and it will be seen as like greenwashing or whatever. But so, yeah, but so we say, yeah.
Well, I get it in terms of the intentionality of that. Like, that's impressive. Sustainability in every single meeting, just being intentional and having it always be, you know, in at least in the back of your minds or in the forefront of a meeting is so important, and really can make that change.
I mean, in Verizon last year, I think it was also, I mean, we interviewed Hans in the book as well, even though he's technically not a Swedish company anymore. But he's still a Swede. But in the work at Verizon, you know, they have named society as a stakeholder officially, you know, in all of their, you know, corporate material. You know, they have employees, they have the shareholder, they have the customer, and they've put society as, they call it, their fourth North Star, which is back to the conversation of society as a stakeholder. What I hope will be, you know, inspiration for other companies to do similar.
Elaine, you've mentioned the Sustainable Development Goals a couple times throughout this episode. Now, the one thing I've come to understand about all these goals is how interconnected they are. So when you say the term impact, what exactly do you mean by that?
Impact, I mean, could be here's what I don't mean. I mean, like, and I tried to give that example, like you can't combine all those 17 goals and say, here's my impact, like as it's one thing, because it's not, you know, they're also ranging from health and education to sustainable cities to climate action, you know, and peace and justice. So you have the 17 goals and they're all different. There are sets of indicators behind each goal, but what's very difficult for companies, those goals were written for governments, for nation states to measure progress toward the achievement of the Sustainable Development Agenda. So they weren't really written for, like, you know, a sustainability officer or a CEO. So you have to, if you're going to use them as your framework, you have to know what they are and be able to relate, you know, different goals to your business. So, and focus on the ones that matter. So there, and I know there's a lot of work being done now by different UN agencies to try to make them easier for businesses to relate to. But I think that's a challenge. So in the book, we have a whole chapter on this about how can you relate the SDGs or the global goals to a specific company.
How would you define impact for someone who's listening to this for the first time and is hearing all of these words and says, well, what exactly is impact?
Impact is what effect are you causing? Now I'm talking, of course, not in the financial sense or other sense of impact. I'm talking about sustainability impact. It's knowing what are the material issues to you and your business, and what effect are you having? If you're having, you know, a lot of air emissions, you know, you would have impacts on human health, and you know, so you have to follow it through. You have to decide. It's like doing you know, a materiality assessment is if you're in the business of sustainability, that's one of the first things you have to know how to do. But it's basically going through your whole value chain and understanding where do you cause something that was intended or unintended? And it's not enough to say anymore. I worked with business and human rights issues for many, many years. And going back 20 or 30 years, you could say, oh, sorry, we didn't know. These days, you can't say, as a global responsible or local responsible company, you can't say, we didn't know what your impact, you're expected to know. And that's the way the law is evolving as well. So it's no longer acceptable to say, sorry, we didn't know smoking kills. It's the only industry that kills 50% of its customers, kills them. So you can't say you didn't know anymore. Today, you're expected. If you're a responsible leader, you must know, or at least try to know, and chase down as much information as you can.
Elaine, like the episode with Henrik, this all boils down to leadership, at the end of the day. And transforming that leadership is a big integral part of this book. How can we influence today's impact leaders to make a change today? So let's bring this home, Elaine. What is your definition of a real leader?
I think a real leader is someone who dares to take a stand on an issue, whether or not it's the most popular issue of the day, but using responsibility, empathy, humility, and daring to stand up for issues that are important. And then, as I said earlier, knowing that your own individual platform is important and that it matters, and daring to use it. That, to me, is the good definition of a sustainability leader, at least.
Elaine, amazing. Thank you so much for coming on the show. We're going to have you stick around for some questions. I saw a few questions flying in here. Folks, if you're listening to this on Crowdcast, please type your questions in for Elaine, and we'll see if Henrik's still available to have them answered after the show. But for Elaine Grunewald, I'm Kevin Edwards, asking you to go out there, be daringly responsible, and always, folks, keep it real. Thanks, Elaine.
Thanks a lot, Kevin.
All right, good people. Well, Crowdcast and LinkedIn, thank you so much for taking all 54 minutes here on the Real Leaders podcast. Oh, my bad, an hour, 13 minutes. I might be going over time here. Thank you for everyone who's hanging on. We got a few questions that have flown in here, Elaine. So I'm going to see first if Henrik's still available, see if we can get him back on here and onto the screen. If he's there, great. If not, we'll kind of start this question off, Elaine. First one comes in right here. It says, how do you help to influence other top leaders who are fully committed yet to sustainability? Who are fully committed to
You write a book and you send it to them.
Exactly. Simple enough.
No, I think it, I guess, depends if you're talking about the world or you're thinking about one specific person. But if you have one specific person, it does, I think, help to send a book or reach out to them in different ways. Here's Henrik.
He's back.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, good.
Okay, so let's Elaine, can you hear me first of all, Elaine?
I can hear you.
Okay, so just want to make sure. Okay, great. Now that our technology is working. Geez, folks, we were having such a hard time before the show. Second question is coming in. Henrik, how about you take this one? How do you help to, we already got that one. How do you help influence? Okay. How about this one? What would you say to someone who says this methodology sounds great, but my EBITDA is going to be much lower. This is a trade-off for me.
Yeah, I think then I would say challenge your business model. Think about sort of what is your value proposition, what sort of value you come across, and to what customer, and try to think beyond sort of like your traditional business model. And I mean that. Going back to my example before about sort of talking about your customer's customer, I think to try to change the rules of the game. So I think that's one of challenge your business model, which is also, how do you charge for the value that you have? Can you find other ways of selling your product? That's I think one part. The other one I think is to think about the long-term implications. it might be so today about your EBIT, but in 1 year or 2 years, you smoked, and then it's too late to change, actually.
Got it. Interesting. Yeah, and that was kind of the conversation we had earlier, Henrik, about Milton Friedman, and at that time the information they had was the social purpose is if you make those decisions, you make them for your shareholders to increase their profitability. So they have the decisions at their own. Where do you kind of draw the line and distinction between a free capital market society and then how, in order to achieve the goals, we may have to have some, let's say, some political pressure, social pressure on these businesses to make these change, where there may be some belly aches and then people may come around. How do you see that evolving in these next couple of years, considering the social pressures we're seeing are all around the world, and with the environmental damages that are very clear to society?
Yeah, I think that you will have at least two forces. One, of course, I think will be that society moves, and with that, then corporate companies have to move as well, as we describe in the book. But I think it's also that policymakers and politicians will move. And I think one thing that's coming up more and more to be like a common agenda between the policymakers and the corporate world is actually that we need a price on carbon. We need a price on CO2 that is something that everyone can relate on. That you cost that into your investment calculation, into your business cases. As a company, that I think will definitely change the name of the game, and I think that is something that we will see coming through in the world, either on sort of voluntary matters from the companies, or by sort of tough legislation, or as a combination of the two. So price on CO2, I would welcome that. I think that would really create an acceleration of the transformation.
Elaine, you all talked about collaboration, that being a big key amongst the CEO audience, making sure you're all talking across sectors. What are some tools or platforms or common practices that you have found helpful in this?
And Kevin, I just want to say before I answer, I
Yeah.
still have the same audio problem, so I couldn't hear anything Henrik said. So just in case I repeat anything, that's why. But I think cross-sector collaboration, I've been involved in a number of different initiatives. I mean, there's so many different groups, like the Sustainable Development Solutions Network is one group where you have a cross-section of academics, private sector, many others working on trying to solve some of the problems. There are pros and cons of industry groups. Henrik mentioned that earlier during his interview, that sometimes you get stuck with the lowest common denominator. So if you can actually grow cross-sector to other sectors, sometimes you can achieve more. And I know Henrik probably wants to comment on this because they've done a fantastic job in the whole driving the shift of working, towards other sectors. And that's, we write about that in the book, about creating new types of societal ecosystems. So again, once you understand what your impacts are, you might not have all the answers, but you can start to create a map of who are your influencers and how they might be able to guide and work with you on solving a challenge. Henrik, the bioeconomy is the perfect example of what you've done at Scania with that.
Yeah, maybe I should pitch in. I think you're right. I think you get also a better credibility towards policymakers, and to have like a sort of eye-level dialogue. If you come in not talking about your own sort of industry problem, and if you come a whole sort of cross-sectoral group and present the case, then the policymakers tend to sort of listen more to you. And I think that is what's needed, create that trust and transparency. And that we've seen by sort of gathering a number of players linked to, for example, producing biofuels, like contaminated land from the ex-Soviet Union era in Eastern Europe, a growing sort of fast-growing crop that can be used for for sort of producing biofuels on that, and then produce it and then distribute it through normal challenge, and find someone who can do the transport with that vehicle, and someone who buys that transport and sees the benefits of CO2 reduction. Then if you come with a sort of like a chain of change like that to the policymakers in Brussels or in Washington, they will listen to you more than if I come and say, oh, I need sort of a lower tax on fuel or so.
Amazing. Well, I just want to thank you both for coming on, inspiring these meaningful connections. Hopefully we can continue to accelerate this book, this change in the world that we see. You all are both very inspired leaders for me, our generation. So thank you so much for coming on the Real Leaders Podcast. Any last words of advice or where people can find more information about your book?
The book's available at Palgrave. Palgrave Macmillan's the publisher, so you can just go to palgrave.com, or you can go on Amazon or any of the main retail sites. And my last piece of advice is that it's a great Christmas present.
There you go.
Yeah. And to add to that, I think go out and join us. I mean, there's no better time to start than now. So go out and think about your legacy. Then that will motivate you to get started.
I love it. The time is now. The time is now, folks. Let's get this show on the road. Let's continue this momentum and make sure that we're listening to the Real Leaders Podcast tomorrow when this podcast is released, and make sure we'll have that link in the description so everyone can go purchase that book and start today. Elaine, Henrik, thank you so much for your time. Enjoy the rest of the week and happy holidays.
Thanks, Kevin, for having us.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks.
Bye.
I'll work on
Bye-bye.
my Swedish, Henrik. Don't worry.